If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone, and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. Hey guys, welcome to tonight's California Haunts Radio. We've got a good show for you while we wait for Ivor to come on. I want to introduce myself. My name is Charlotte, and I am the hostess of the California Haunts Radio Show. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. But we also have members up and down the state, about 35 members strong, all in major cities, and Oregon, Washington, and parts of Hawaii, which is kind of fun, and Nevada. Anyway, welcome to the show. Right now, we've got some spring weather going on and been outside working in the yard. I don't know about you guys, but it's been nice. Tomorrow's supposed to be another springy day, but kind of windy. So, we'll see how that plays out. Planted some palm trees today and stuff. Anyhow, while we wait for Ivor to come on, Ivor is an interesting person. He's a journalist, and back in the 60s, he got to travel and tour with the Beatles. And during this tour, he got really close to the guys. So he is going to probably be talking about that tonight. And he also, I believe he covered the Charles Manson trials. And I wouldn't say he got close to Manson, but he, had, like me, taking notes during the trial. And taking notes during the trial. And he took all those notes and everything he had and decided to write a book about his time covering Charles Manson. I think he interviewed him a couple of times. So hopefully we'll get to talk about that tonight. Again, we are on a time change with him, and hopefully he's got electricity and everything he needs to pop through. I got an email from him this afternoon that he was ready to go, and so we're just waiting for him to come on. But I'm excited, and I hope you are too. If anything goes wrong tonight, we'll just tell more ghost stories, I guess, and move on to Wednesday, but hopefully he'll come on. I just emailed him a few minutes ago to remind him, but he may be having trouble. But anyway, how is everybody? It's been, how many months are we into COVID now? It's almost going to be a year, right? Because all this started, I remember having my birthday party in February, and then everything suddenly started to change in March when all the COVID stuff started coming out. So I guess we're, within a week of it being a year since COVID started? And how all our lives have changed, and we're stuck at home and doing stuff. Some people are still working from home. Some people are still taking care of those kids, the other kids, and teaching them from home and stuff. So it's been a big adjustment for everybody, and having to wear masks everywhere. But I know a lot of people right now are getting their injections, getting their vaccines and stuff. So that's really cool. So I'm looking forward to being on the list for my vaccine sometime in March and getting out in the real world and getting back out. But like they say, it's going to be a while because they have to get herd immunity going, and it'd probably be even after summer before we all are able to go out and function in a somewhat normal way and not have to mask up. But honestly, I don't mind wearing the mask. It doesn't bother me. Some people it doesn't bother me. So, and I remember when this first happened in March, I remember I was one of the first people to mask up and wear rubber gloves when I went out. I would wear a pair of sunglasses, a pair of see-through, sunglasses with like clear lenses when I went out. And it was funny because I would go into stores, and sometimes I'd walk, sometimes I'd be on a scooter, and it was funny because people would part when I would come down the aisles. So I thought it was hilariously funny, like I had the plague or something. And I don't know if you guys remember the big rush on the stores, for the toilet paper. and all that other stuff too. I mean, that was crazy. It's something that that I took photos of because I just couldn't get over the massive panic because they were going to lock us down, and all the toilet paper was gone and all the meat was gone, and it was weird stuff that people took. It was stuff they could warm because they're because they're kids at home, so it was stuff that they could warm up like waffles, chicken nuggets. It was easy to cook stuff that you could nuke or whatever, just so you could make sure the kids were eating and whatnot. So I remember that, and I remember looking at the thing. I remember seeing this guy go out with hand sanitizer, wipes, and I remember he had 2 carts full, and he and his wife were in line at Walmart, before they started putting caps on stuff. It was insane. It was really, really insane to see. And even now, even now the stores don't have the supply stuff that they used to have. Like when you go into Walmart, there's still a lot of stuff missing. You got to hit the right days. But it was an adventure. It was an adventure trying to find toilet paper, for the longest time. I just had my own little secret way to do it, which I didn't tell anybody except my family. And I was able to stay stocked up on TP and stuff. But it was crazy. So, yeah, we're coming up on a year anniversary. But today was also a very somber day in that it marked 500,000 people. 500,000 people have died from this stuff. So whether you believe it's true or not, there's 500,000 deaths that says it is. And so they did a thing at the White House today. President Biden did a speech, and then President Biden and Vice President Harris, and her husband, and Biden's wife came out. And it was real pretty. If you guys didn't see it on the news, you should check it out. They had a bunch of candles that went up the outside portion of the Oval Office area, and it went up like this balcony, these candles. So it was really cool. Really, really cool. Real pretty, when they came out. So, that went down today. So, to honor those people that have passed. And, until everybody starts getting more and more vaccinated, it's still going to keep happening. It's not Biden's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just, it is what it is. So, that's what we have to do. And I know, the people that are fighting this and whatnot. And I have friends, I even have friends who are going to refuse to take the vaccine. So, that's just who they are. And, a lot of them are staunch, conservatives. So they're going to do what they're going to do. You can't talk somebody, unless something happens, to them or close to them, that a death or something happens close to them, it's not going to affect them. They're not going to, I'm not going to say care, but I mean that they're not going to, it's not going to register with them, to be honest. So that's going to take a toll too, because you're going to have that bunch of people that doesn't vaccinate. But for the rest of us that vaccinate, I used to laugh because I was kind of mean on Facebook, for a long time with people. And I used to laugh and say, well, for the rest of us that vaccinate, now we're going to get to see herd immunity at work, because the ones that will be getting sick are the ones that don't vaccinate, so they're going to get their so-called lessons. But I don't want to be that mean to people anymore. Anyway, it looks like he's having trouble getting on. So if anybody has a topic they want to talk about, we can do that until he gets on, or, we might have to reschedule him. But last week we were talking about Mardi Gras with Shannon McCabe, and I learned a lot about the Mardi Gras. I had no idea the history of the Mardi Gras or any of that. So I did learn a lot from her, and I hope to work with, like I said, we were planning, even after we were off at the air last week, we were planning to do some stuff together. So I'm hoping to learn some stuff. Every investigator I know, I worked with a woman named Gloria Young who has since passed away. That was my mentor in the paranormal field. And she had said that anybody that claims they're an expert in this field is lying, because there's really no experts in this field, because it's not really a firm. I'm sorry with her 100% with that. Where am I going with this? I totally got lost in what I said. Anyway, that's what she told me years and years ago, experts in this field. So, if you run into a paranormal investigator out there, wherever you live, that says that they're an expert in doing this, it's not true. There's no one that's an expert. I mean, you can wave your wands and stuff all you want, but I mean, we go out there, we're just guessing like anybody else. And one of the things we tell people when we go out and we have them sign a form, I'm just checking my email here. And we have a form that we have the client sign that says we do this as a hobby. This is not something that we make a living at or anything like that. We're just as interested in this next guy, and if we're available to help, if we're able to available, if we're able to help somebody, then that's what makes it all the more difference. And I know Ricardo said some interesting things about some of the teams that just go out to say some place is haunted, and they're really not doing justice to people. And I agree with that. I agree with that 100%, in that it's taken years for me to amass the team members I have, because the majority of my team members, half are, the majority of them are debunkers, to where they're going to look at the logical part of it. And then of course you do have your believers, and you need a balance of both. Not to mention, I have 3 psychologists on staff to work with people. When the bells go off when you're interviewing somebody, we go out. We've got a 102 question questionnaire, and it ranges. What have you seen? What kind of TV shows do you watch? Do you watch Ghost Adventures? Do you watch these TV shows? How does what you're experiencing compare to the TV shows? We go into how their home life is. Have you are you guys stressed out? Are you arguing? Is there something going on within the family? That kind of thing. And then we also ask them, and a lot of the time they're dishonest about it, because people don't want to tell us or not. I mean, whose business is it of ours as to whether they're taking drugs or what they're doing? But we do ask them that question too, if they're a recreational drug user, or if maybe they have an addiction going on, or something like that's going on, because that helps us put together the whole synopsis and package, about what might be going on with this person. It may not be paranormal. It may be something related to some medication they're taking, or maybe they're drinking alcohol at night, more than they should, or something's going on, or stress can play a lot in it too. It can play a lot in what people see and hear at night, things that go bump in the night. We had a case in Rockland that we went out on a few years ago, that the family the husband and wife would get in these horrible arguments, and then they'd go to bed at night, and then there was pounding in the walls of the bedroom. And they couldn't figure out what it was, and they would see an apparition every once in a while, somebody they didn't recognize, and things like that. And as it turned out, what was going on is they were going to bed, but they were going to bed without resolving the situation. So the wife was really frustrated. So she was causing, she would go to bed and she would cause poltergeist activity, which would cause this pounding and everything. So we had to address that, Poltergeist activity is interesting. I mean, if you're going through, and in fact, if you guys are fans of the Waltons, and believe it or not, fans of the Waltons and the Bionic Woman, I found something on the Bionic Woman, but the Waltons have a particular episode where Elizabeth is about to turn, I think, 12 or 13. And weird things start happening in the house, and they all happen around her. Like rocks will come in through the windows and land on the floors. The rocking chair will go back and forth by itself. Stuff like that, goes on. Or they'll be listening to the radio, and it'll get all staticky and stuff. And then all of a sudden, or the windows will pop open, and then the wind comes through in the drapes, and all this. And it's Corbett Godsey that tells Olivia that this is happening because Elizabeth is going through puberty. And you find that a lot. You find a lot of these cases where there's knocks and pings and stuff going on in the house at night, or footsteps, or in some cases cabinets opening and closing on their own. It's because there's a child in the house who is going through puberty, because it's just a whole bunch of stuff going through the body that's happening to them. Another thing that happens is we run into a lot of little kids that have abilities. You guys got to remember, we're all born with abilities, believe it or not. And when we're young, our imaginary friends, stuff like that, it could be ghosts that we're seeing and we don't realize it. Because when we're talking to our imaginary friends, we actually hear them talk back. So think about that for a while, okay? I've had 3 or 4 cases where the parents, in fact, one in Sacramento in particular that we were really close with, that we work with, to help with the mother and the daughter, because the mother's also sensitive. And they had complaints where everybody would be asleep in the house, and they'd wake up the next morning and all the pots and pans were down, were out of the cabinets, and nobody had been moving because the little girl was 2 years old and she had been seeing stuff in her room when she was sleeping, so they moved her into the room with them. And that way they could hold on her, keep an eye on her and stuff, so they know she wasn't getting up at night. All right, here comes Ivor. I see him. He's there. Dun, dun, dun. Let me get him in on here.
Just before.
Good evening.
Amazing. Can you see me okay?
I can see you fine. Nice
I can see you. Something's haunted. Something's haunting us. I've been calling people to try and get a message through to you. I don't know if you ever got my emails from friends who were sending you messages saying there's no internet.
Interesting.
It just came back.
See, I don't know.
I'm a bit concerned about being on with your haunting guys. Listen, I hate to tell you this. This has never happened to me before. Not before, because I'm pretty reliable, believe me. What's your name?
I'm Charlotte.
Oh, you're Charlotte. Oh, okay. I thought for some reason I thought you were a girl. Why did I think?
I'm a girl.
Oh, you are a girl. Oh, you got a hat on. Okay.
I just wore my
There
hat.
you go. Okay. Well, we were wearing that baseball cap. I wondered. Charlotte, good to see. Did you ever get my email?
I got the one from this afternoon.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I got all my friends to call you and send you a note to say I'm not getting on. Anyway, we're here. Where are you, by the way?
I just emailed you when I started, and I guess you didn't get it. It's okay. We're here. We're here.
So I was supposed to be on 20 minutes ago with you, wasn't I?
Yeah, that's okay.
So where are you, by the way?
I'm in Sacramento, California.
Okay, I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard of it.
And where are you?
I'm in Ventura, California.
All right.
Yeah. Well, Sacramento's usually too hot in the summer.
Yeah.
That's where our government supposedly operates.
And it's too bloody cold in the winter.
Is it? Yeah. How long have you been in Sacramento?
All my life.
Oh, okay. You went to school and
I went to school and everything. Yeah, everything in Sacramento.
Wow.
It gets too cold here to snow. That's how cold it gets.
Oh wow. Yeah. It's a good 6-hour drive, isn't it? From at least.
Yeah.
But you're only about 2 hours from San Francisco, aren't you?
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to be able to go to the coast.
Yeah.
And we're only an hour away from the snow. I mean, if we want to go up and go skiing or whatever,
Yeah. Well, I apologize.
Well, you guys are too, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we people go to Mammoth from here, and I used to in my youth when I was a bright young man. Now I'm just an old man. Anyway.
Tell us about you. I want to hear about your life. Man, you're a heck of a journalist.
Well, thank you. Well, where do you want me to begin? I mean, I was very lucky to get a job from London. I moved here from London, and then finally I was hired by a big London newspaper back in the 60s, early 60s. And I was bureau chief for a big London newspaper when people actually read newspapers. Remember those days? No, you probably are too young.
I remember those days.
Okay. I've got some. Are we recording? Because I'm going to.
We are recording.
Oh, sorry. I'm on, Gideon. I'll talk to you later. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I had my son. I was going to go over to my son's house to try and use his internet, but he didn't have internet. Anyway, so picking up what you were saying. So I came to America in the early 60s, working for the London Daily Express. Very lucky to get the job. They opened a new bureau, put me bureau chief. And one of the first big jobs I got was to travel to San Francisco, where this group from Liverpool had just landed. I forget the name of the group. Oh, gosh. Well,
the Beatles.
Oh, the Beatles. Oh,
yeah.
That's it. So that's right. I'm kidding you. I'm pulling your leg.
I was close with Bugs, right? I was close with Bugs.
The Bugs, yeah, they were called the Bugs. They were once called the Silver Beatles. Anyway, so look, who knew? This is 1964. This is in the 20th century. I mean, even going far back to that. And to be honest with you, they've been a great success on a show called The Ed Sullivan Show. And as soon as they were a great success there, their manager, Brian Epstein, said, let's do an American tour. And I was lucky enough to cover that tour. It was 5 crazy, crazy weeks where, to be honest with you, every concert I went to, I couldn't hear the music because the girls were screaming from start to finish. So that got me off to an interesting start. But I must tell you, Charlotte, that frankly, back then I never knew the Beatles would be so big. And I never knew that 50 odd years later, you and I would be talking about the Liverpool Lads.
Wow. What were they like?
They were young, like me. John Lennon was a riot. He was immediately, he liked to provoke. And my name's Ivor. He said, you're Ivan. I said, no, it's Ivor. He said, you're Ivan the Terrible. I said, okay, John, thank you. Paul was a very smoothie, even back then. Very nice guy. And I like to say that, we traveled on their private jet. And Paul would come up to me and say, what would you like to drink, Ivor? And I'd say, give me a gin and tonic, Paul. And he'd give me a gin and tonic, and I wouldn't even have to tip him. Anyway, that was Paul. And the other guys, Ringo was on the drums. Well, in those days, the drummers are drummers. They bang away. They don't pay much attention to anyone else. But he was a nice kid. And there was George. And George wasn't very friendly. And the problem was that I had to write a column for him. I wrote his column about life in America on the tour. And he never woke up until 2 p.m. And I had to send my story to London by 12 noon. So, to be honest with you, for the first few weeks, I made up the column. But don't tell anyone. But George found out, and George came to me and said, your column, which is running in London, in the biggest newspaper in London, is a load of old, he used a rather strong term, rubbish. How about rubbish? I said, George, wake up at a decent hour. Tell me what's going on in your mind, and I will write a better column. And he did, and we got on very well after that. But they were 4 young men, very funny, great sense of humor. Oh, just fun to be with. But it was crazy because they never saw America. They went from private jet to limousine. They were in limousine number 1. I was in limousine number 2. Straight to the hotel. We had a press conference, stayed in the hotel because if they left the hotel, they would have been torn to shreds. Anyway, so we go to the concert. From the concert, they would be rushed out to the waiting limousine or waiting armored car or an ambulance because they had to get out because the fans were crazily passionate about them. And that was it. They never saw America.
Wow. So what did they do there? Well, obviously it was hard to have any off time when you were touring like that. So what did they do to while away the hours when they had the time?
What they did was they were stuck with me and a couple of the photographers. And John would call me at 2 a.m. and say, I'm playing Monopoly, come over. Oh, okay. So we played Monopoly at 2 or 3 a.m. He would then, if you keep this to yourself, he would cheat in Monopoly because he rolled the dice. And if he didn't land on the number he wanted to, or the place he wanted to, the hotel he wanted to, he would roll again. But, I didn't really give him a hard time for that. And it was nice because it was 2 o'clock in the morning in wherever we were in America. And he would pick up the phone in the middle of the game and call his wife, Cynthia, and kind of make goo-goo, ba-ba noises to his son, baby son, Julian. And then we'd hang up the phone and we'd continue playing and he'd continue cheating. But it was fun. And I used to scrounge drinks from John. He was very good at that, except his minibar hotel bill went over the top and he got reprimanded by Brian Epstein. Can you believe Brian Epstein was saying, hey, John, your minibar bill is $11. Oh, wow, really? Anyway, that was it. So that was the kind of fun things. And it was crazy. I mean, it was, look, you couldn't hear a thing. The girls screamed. I sat in the front row. On one occasion, somebody said, George loves jelly beans. Ah, that's nice. And the next day, where it was Chicago or wherever we were, we never played Sacramento. We played San Francisco. I say we. I was there as a spectator.
Right.
Anyway, jelly beans. So the next day, all the girls in the audience had jelly beans. The problem was that George liked those soft, gummy jelly beans, and the American jelly beans were like they were like missiles. And so they would throw the jelly beans during the concert, and I would be sitting in the front row, and it would hit me in the back of the head. And I've still got jelly bean scars, even today, from being bombarded by jelly beans aimed at George, but hitting me. Tough job. I should have had war correspondence pay.
So as a journalist, because we're trained a certain way, did the lifestyle of the tour kind of throw you at first?
Yeah, it was kind of strange. I mean, we'd get into a town, Dallas or wherever. The Beatles would not see anything. Las Vegas, they never saw anything. There's pictures of them pulling the slot machines. They never went into the casino. They brought the slot machines into their room. And John said at the end of the tour, it's been a fantastic success. Sellouts everywhere, packed crowds. But we never saw America. We never stepped outside our hotel in any town. I mean, that was terrible. Of course, as you know, and as Beatle fans know, years later, I mean, John came to America. Ringo lived in America. John was living in New York, unfortunately, when he was shot, when he was killed. And Paul McCartney has a home in America and has a home in England as well. So America has been very big for the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. This is all fascinating to me. Can you tell these guys, did they do any writing or anything while they were on the road, or were they just too busy?
No. The funny thing was, and when you look at it today, Charlotte, I would say that today, maybe a star does one album a year. The Beatles did about 4 albums or 5 albums a year. So when we were on the road in America in 1964, in August and September and part of October, the Beatles had to write 20 songs for their Christmas album, which had to come out in December the 1st. So the Beatles, I'd walk into the suite. There were no guards. I walk into the suite. There was John and Paul sitting on the floor writing music. And when I saw that they were busy writing songs, I just left. But they had to churn out dozens of songs, and they did. And that's why today, I mean, I don't think, I hate to, I don't mean to ask you how old you are, but certainly I don't think you were a sparkle in your parents' eyes, even when the Beatles were big. So, I mean, we're talking about a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the Beatles' job. They had to turn out all these records. They had to do their 2 concerts a day sometimes, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. And before, we never went back to the hotel after the second concert, straight into the limo, straight to the airport, straight onto the private jet, straight to the next venue. It was kind of insane. And as I said, they never saw anything. And the interesting thing was, John, I remember in Dallas, and I wanted to go as well. John said, I want to go and see the grassy knoll, because John Kennedy had been murdered, assassinated in Dallas in 1963, November. And this was less than a year later. And John wanted to see the spot or the area. And Brian Epstein said, their manager, Brian Epstein said, no, John, you go out to the site of the Kennedy assassination. It's negative publicity for you. Let's avoid controversy. Stay in your hotel room. And unfortunately, that's what happened.
Interesting. And then I would think that after coming off stage like that, they would be wired. That high you get, even after doing this show, I'm wired. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you do. I mean, you get off the show, you'll get off your show, and you know why? Because your adrenaline is pumping when you're doing this. and you get off and you feel good. You've done a good show. You've done, and you can't suddenly go home and go to sleep unless you're a miracle.
So
Can you do that?
No, absolutely not. It's crazy. So,
Yes.
I mean, after they would get off stage, obviously there'd be some energy there. So, what would happen when they get off stage? I mean, they're going to go straight to an airplane.
They get off stage, and that's why. Look, John was calling me at 2 a.m. to play Monopoly.
Right. That makes sense.
So they go. They'd have a few drinks. They party with themselves. I mean, come on. Partying with yourself is not very good. But I will tell you this, of course, there were many young women after the show who wanted to hold their hand. Now they had to be careful. They had to be very careful about young underage girls. And, look, these were 4 young men. I mean, John was married, true, with healthy libidos. And if somebody wanted to go, get up close and personal with them, the Beatles were not loath to do that. But I'll tell you this. If we saw that there was hanky-panky going on, we never wrote about it, because I knew that if I wrote a negative story about the Beatles, then Brian Epstein, the manager, would say, Ivor, good to see you. Here's your ticket home. Mm-hmm. And also, let me ask you this. When you're with somebody for weeks and days on end, you feel like your family, and you don't tell on family, And so they knew that after the first few weeks. They knew that I was a friendly face, and I was not about to. I mean, today, to be honest with you, as I say, if somebody sneezes in Ventura, California, in Sacramento, within 8 seconds, you know about it,
right?
Because we didn't have the internet. Don't forget. Big difference. Big difference. So it was a fantastic tour. It was an amazing experience, but yet I must confess, I didn't realize how big it was until years later, because I was a reporter, and you go from one story to the other story. When I left the Beatles and they went back to England, and I came back to California, my editor called me the next day and said, "Hey, there's the Warren Commission report just come out. We want you to get it and write us a story." So you just, next patient, please. Next story, please. Right. You know what I mean?
You just move right on, yeah.
You do.
So a lot of people are disappointed with journalists because they think once you get on a story, you're going to stay and follow up with people and stuff, and you really don't have the time, because the second you're done, there's something else sitting on your desk.
That's exactly it. I mean, whether it's in radio news, whether it's in newspapers, the way it was, the next story, and you didn't dwell on it. You didn't say, "Wow, that was quite an experience." It's there, it's embedded in your skull, but you go on to the Warren Commission report, or a new riot in Watts, California, with the city burning and stuff like that. You just move on.
What do you think was the funniest thing happened when you were on tour with them?
Well, there were so many funny things that happened. I mean, I won't say the funny thing. I would say that the next year, in 1965, I joined them at the Hollywood Bowl, but we'd seen it all. And the most, I wouldn't say this is funny, it's just kind of intriguing. For a year, they'd been trying to meet Elvis Presley, and it never happened. Elvis was making movies. John was a great fan of Elvis. John grew up with Heartbreak Hotel and Blue Suede Shoes and all the Elvis numbers, but it never happened. And Elvis was making movies. And then in 65, I got a call from Mal Evans, who was their roadie, saying, "Ivor, we're going to go and see Elvis. Get over here." So I went with them to see Elvis. It was an incredible thing because it was supposed to be no press, no photographers, no tape recorders. The only thing was I was press, and I managed to squeeze in. That you will not find one single picture of the Beatles and Elvis, because Colonel Parker, who was the manager of Elvis, and Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, agreed, believe it or not, that this historic rock and roll summit was not to be recorded. And so you go out, look around, you won't find a single picture. But I was there. I was a fly on the wall. And I'll just tell you briefly. I mean, we walk into the house, and there, sitting on a couch with a television remote in his hand, was a guy who had kind of shag carpet sideburns and was in a tight outfit. And I looked again, and that was Elvis. There was Elvis watching television. Nobody, when we arrived at Elvis's house, had the good sense to stand up and say, Charlotte, I'd like you to meet John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Nobody made the introduction. So we stood around for 15 minutes watching a giant 16-inch television screen on the wall. That was 16 inches with giant in those days. And nobody said anything. Finally, after 10 minutes of everybody sitting around like they didn't know what to say, after all, it was Elvis's house, and the Beatles were guests, so you don't overtake the place, even though if you're the Beatles. You wait for somebody to say, hey, guys, meet each other. Finally, Elvis jumps up and says, hey, if you guys don't want to jam, I'm going to bed. And we all laughed. And then the Beatles laughed, and they brought out guitars, and Elvis and the Beatles started jamming. And that was wonderful, but they never played any Beatles songs, only Elvis songs.
Wow.
Blue Suede Shoes. Yeah. And that was it. Now, I must tell you, I don't want to go on endlessly, and cut me off if you want to. The interesting thing was that I realized later on that, number one, Elvis was jealous of the Beatles. He was jealous of the Beatles because, number one, he was number one, and now he was no longer king of the castle, no longer king of the hit parade, because these little interlopers from Liverpool, England, had taken over. That's number one. Elvis was making 3 crappy movies a year. And he said they were crappy. Elvis admitted it. I did an interview with him once, and he said, it's the same story with a different girl and 3 different songs or 5 different songs. He was fed up. The Beatles come along, and they make their first movie called A Hard Day's Night. Wow, big hit. So Elvis, the undercurrent that I didn't know at the time was that Elvis was a little bit envious. And they got on well. They told stories. They talked about a couple of movies they liked. And Elvis got a little bit upset when Paul McCartney said, hey, Elvis, and he meant it nicely. He said, why don't you do the kind of songs that you used to do? Well, that to Elvis was a bit of an insult, because Elvis was thinking, well, why are they telling me to do the old songs? I've done a lot of new songs. Are they trying to put me down? Paul was not trying to put him down. Believe me, I spoke to Paul afterwards. So they said they would meet again. They never did meet again. And then about 5 years later, the Beatles were very, very upset because Elvis went to the White House and he met Richard Nixon. Mm-hmm. And he said to Richard Nixon, these Beatles, they come to America, they make $1 million, they go back with all the money they earned in America, and they badmouth America. Well, Charlotte, that was not true. For some reason, Elvis made that big whopper up, told it to Nixon. I don't know why. Maybe he was trying to impress Nixon, because the reason he went to see Nixon was he said to Nixon, I can get you the votes for president. A lot of young people pay attention to what I say. And then he threw in this lie about the Beatles, and the Beatles, when they heard that, were very upset at Elvis, and they never met again, of course. And then Elvis died in his 40s. I mean, we know the story. Terrible, terrible drug habit. Anyway, that's another story that most music people know about, tragically.
Interesting. Oh, now that you mentioned Elvis, what did you hear stories of what he was like, in the books? What was he like when you interviewed him?
Well, the first time I interviewed him was at Paramount Studios. I think he was making a film with either Anne Margaret or Mary Ann Mobley. And I want to tell you, he was charming. He kept calling. I mean, he was like, I think he was probably about my age. He kept calling me sir. I mean, It was kind of odd. And it wasn't a great interview. Then, after I interviewed him in his dressing room for about 15 minutes about his movies and stuff like that, a guy came in and said, "Oh, Al, we need you on the set." And I said, "Oh, can I come and watch you work?" And the publicist said, "Oh, no, Elvis doesn't like strangers." I was a stranger of seeing him act. I said, "Okay, well, Elvis, good to meet you." And as I was driving away, there was a little parking lot on the studio, and I look at the parking lot, and there's about 8 guys playing football, and guess who's in the middle playing football? Elvis. Oh, so that was the first thing. And then in the last days of Elvis, I went to the Las Vegas Hilton Hotel, and I went to see Elvis perform. And I want to tell you, it was sad because Elvis was at the end of his career. I mean, he wasn't really, but he was. I mean, I'm talking about the death of Elvis.
Mm-hmm.
He was overweight. He couldn't get into his jumpsuit. He actually forgot the lines of one of his songs. And I was sitting next to an Australian photographer named Colin Dangard. And I saw Colin sneak a little camera out of his pocket and take a picture of the fat Elvis. Within 15 seconds, 3 security guys jumped on this photographer, Colin, grabbed his camera and took him out. So, I mean, that shows you that they were aware that he was looking pretty bad. And then about 6 months later, we got the terrible news that Elvis was dead. He died in Memphis in the bathroom, and his body was riddled with drugs that enablers, that friends, doctors knew he was taking. I mean, what a great talent Elvis was to have his life snuffed out at the age of 43, 44. I could be wrong by a year or two, but that was it. And the other thing about Elvis, if I may tell you, was when I went to see Elvis in Las Vegas when he was chubby, I went to see Colonel Parker, and Colonel Parker was the man behind Elvis. And Colonel Parker was working Elvis like a dog. It's like a hard day's night. They're working like a dog. Sorry. Anyway, and the reason I know that is I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
So take a guess, if you would. Elvis played the Las Vegas Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas. And he boosted attendance, he sold out rooms, packed concerts. Would you take a guess over a period of about 5 to 6 or 7 years, how many concerts do you think Elvis performed at the Las Vegas Hilton? Take a guess.
Well, I'm figuring 2 shows a night, possibly.
Yeah, he wasn't there the whole year. He was going for 3 months.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say at least at least 1,000.
No, actually, you're almost right. 850 concerts. I mean, 850. Wow. That's still, you're right, with the 2 concerts a day. So they were milking Elvis for all his worth. He, after a while, I mean, he enjoyed it. But, look, when you do the same old song in the same venue, the same hotel, it's gonna drain you. And that's what happened. I mean, there were great parties I heard. I remember talking to Tom Jones, who was a friend of Elvis, the English singer Tom Jones. So Tom said, "Oh, we used to have great parties with Elvis in Vegas." But so Colonel Parker kind of drained him. Really, he worked him like a demon with about 35 movies, all cookie cutter movies, and all this 800 and whatever concerts. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. And poor old Elvis was getting fed up. And don't forget, Elvis spent 2 years in the American Army in Germany, where he met the young Priscilla, who then came back to marry him. Anyway, so that's the sad story of Elvis, a great talent.
After, over the years, and I know people think that we keep in touch with all our people on stories, and we don't, but did you ever run into any of the Beatles again, after you had written the stuff?
Oh, yeah. I saw Ringo shortly after when he came to America to appear on a PBS, something about an engine, a kids show. I forget what it was. It was like maybe it was I forget, but it was a kids show on PBS network, and I saw him, and the funny story is I don't want to go on endlessly, but the funny story was that I had the interview with the PBS network with Ringo to talk about the show, but Ringo wanted to tell me how he was 4 years, 3 days dry. He'd given up booze, and he went on about his alcoholic problems, which of course the network kids network program didn't want him to talk about. But that was Ringo. Staying on Ringo, I've seen Ringo at several concerts in the last 3 or 4 years. Ringo and the All-Star Band, great show. Ringo is very clever. He does not appear on stage for the full 2 hours and 20 minutes. He comes off, he lets the younger musicians, but people come to see Ringo. So Ringo does that. Ringo does his All-Star Band international tours. John Lennon. I went to see John Lennon before he was murdered in Los Angeles. He was living with a woman called May Pang, who was the kind of secretary at the John Lennon's business, because his wife Yoko Ono at the time told John to go off and go off with May. I mean, it's kind of crazy. But John was fun. I went and spent an afternoon with him, and that was the last time I saw John. And then not long afterwards, he went back to New York, and I think in December 1980, probably, or 90. I'm sorry, I haven't got the exact year. John was murdered. John was assassinated. I saw Paul McCartney. Well, I saw him a year ago. I saw him in San Diego. He was doing a concert before the lockdown period. When I say last year, I mean it was 2019. Petco Stadium, San Diego, 65,000 people showed up for Paul McCartney. Puts on a sensational show. And I went backstage to talk to him, and it was fun. And I asked him, I said, when you, here's a question that I'm going to ask you, Charlotte.
Okay.
When the Beatles performed in 1964 at all the stadiums around America, how long do you think they performed? They did their, how long was their act, and how long were they on stage? Just take a guess.
Really, I'd say maybe an hour and a half.
Yeah. How about 27 minutes?
Wow.
Yeah, 27 minutes. Because they did their 9 to 10 songs, 2 minutes each.
Makes sense.
3 minutes at the most. And as soon as they finished, they were gone. There was no chit chat. There was no. So I couldn't resist saying to Paul, "Hey, Paul, you didn't perform very long, of course, when I first met you. How long do you perform now, today, in San Diego?" He said, "Well, you wait and see." He didn't want to answer that question. So I waited and saw, and Paul was on stage, never left the stage, 3 hours, 15 minutes, all the time, on stage.
Wow.
Big thing. And the other funny thing I must tell you that I enjoyed when I met Paul again in 2019 was I said, "Paul, when you were young and you travel around England before you became famous, you used to travel around in a beat up old car with no back seat. And there were two guys, two roadies, two road managers who drove and carried the bags." I said, "Now, when you travel around the world, do you have a bigger car?" I mean, I was being funny. He said, "Not only do we have a bigger car," he said, "we travel on a jumbo jet." Oh, that makes sense. Because they have so much equipment. And then I said, "Now, there were only two guys, road managers, when you did this in the 60s. How many do you have on the staff?" He said, "We have 92 people traveling with us." So things have changed. So Paul was charming. And so, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm bosom buddies, but I do talk to them if I go to their concerts and say hi, and and it's a nice reunion.
Interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit. You have a book out, and it's written about Charles Manson.
Yes.
tell me how this book came about.
The book you're talking about, Charlotte, is Manson Exposed, a reporter's 50-year journey into madness and murder. And the reason I wrote it was because I covered the Manson murders. You know, I was telling you a little earlier how you go from the Beatles to the Manson murders, or you go from the Watts riots to the Beatles.
It's not a boring job, that's for sure. It's a great career.
No, that's true. It's fun. I mean, you don't stop. You don't have time to stop and say, "Hey, I've had an interesting career." Believe me, you just carry on. You don't think about it until you get old and grey and doddery like me, and then you know.
That's why I'm wearing my hat, because I'm getting old and grey. See, it's.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, come on.
I'm wearing my hat now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so what happened was, because I was working for this big London newspaper, on the first day of the murders, they said, get over to this house in Beverly Hills. There's been some murders. We didn't know who it was. So I raced over to Cielo Drive, which is a nice neighborhood in the canyons of Beverly Hills. And there were a lot of cops outside, and we didn't know who lived there. Again, I was very lucky, because 3 doors away, living in the house on Cielo Drive, was an old mate of mine who used to play soccer with me. I was a soccer player. And so I went to see Phil Freed, that was his name. And I said, Phil, first of all, I said, can I use your phone? Because we didn't have cell phones then. And if you had to phone a story over to London, you had to get to a phone booth. Those are the kind of things that were in stations. I mean, I'm being a bit facetious here. You know, you used to go in there and you used to put coins in them and you used to speak on the phone. Anyway, for those of your listeners who wonder what old-fashioned phones were. So I said to Phil, can I use your phone to call my story into London? But who lives 3 doors away? And he said, Sharon Tate, her husband, Roman Polanski, and some other people. Wow, really? And then, of course, as the day wore on, we got the terrible news, and we were outside the house. There were television cameras, there were newsmen, there were police, kept us away, of course. And they came out, and then they revealed who the victims were. A very, very pregnant Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, and a hairdresser, Jay Sebring, Wojtek Frykowski, his girlfriend, Abigail Folger, and one young man who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, who was leaving in his car, didn't know anybody, got shot by the killers. So that was the story. And then 24 hours later, another similar gruesome murder took place in a different part of LA. And we discovered that Rosemary LaBianca and Lino LaBianca, who ran a chain of grocery stores in LA, had been brutally murdered. Now, the cops said there was no link. The cops said copycat murders. And I want to tell you, I was living in LA for 4 to 5 months until they arrested Charles Manson. Everybody in the movie community was scared. People, Steve McQueen told me he slept with a gun under his bed, a shotgun under his bed, and a pistol under his pillow. That people in those days, they didn't have security guards. They did have electric gates, but they weren't crazy. And in Roman Polanski's house, and Roman Polanski lived in the murder house with his wife, Sharon Tate. I mean, people would drop by just without announcing themselves, and they'd come in through the gate, nobody locked up. As soon as those murders took place in Hollywood went into a fit of panic. And because these people living in a supposedly safe, high-rent district had been brutally murdered. What's going on? Is there a gang of drug addicts? Is it a mafia hit? Is it a revenge? Who knows? So everybody was scared beyond belief. I was going to say scared shitless, but beyond belief is what I'm saying. Anyway, and so nobody knew, what was the reason for this awful murder? And Hollywood was in a panic. And then in December 1st, 1969, I went down to a press conference at LAPD, and the police chief, Edward Davis, stood up and named the suspects. And then he said something else. He said, the same people who killed Sharon Tate killed Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. And then we realized, that that it was that. And as soon as, and I don't want to go on too long, but as soon as I heard Charles Manson, a hippie living at the Spahn movie ranch in the edge of Los Angeles, I went to the ranch, and I was lucky enough to find several members of the Manson family, young girls and two guys who were not involved in the murders. And they told me this amazing story that I didn't believe. They said that Charles Manson brainwashed his followers, and he said to them, the Beatles, remember the Beatles? The Beatles were sending me, Charles Manson, secret messages in the lyrics that you could find on the White Beatles album, the White Album. And Manson made his followers believe songs like Helter Skelter, Revolution, Piggies were all secret messages telling Charles Manson that there was going to be a black-white revolution, there would be rivers of blood, and the Manson family, because they knew this, because they had warning of it, would escape to an underground city in the desert, California desert. Well, when I heard this story, and I knew the Beatles' music, and I thought, what a load of old codswallop, as we used to say, rubbish. And of course, a year later, the district attorney stood up in court and said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's why Charles Manson's gang went out and killed, because they were brainwashed by Beatles lyrics. And when I heard that, I thought, that's crazy. Somebody's gone round the bend. Somebody's bonkers, as we used to say. Long story short, as you and the rest of the world knows, Manson and the gang were convicted on that, on the Beatles made me do it blueprint thesis. Even today, that sounds insane.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, because if I remember the story right, they were talking about how they played the records backwards, and I just don't understand. I mean, I could see you doing it by your hand, you know what I mean? Doing it by hand to do that, but I just don't get the concept of playing a record backward like that.
They said you could play the record backward. Look, I want to tell you, we are in an age of craziness in the news. I mean, I won't go into the political state, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And people believe some very strange things. Even today, they believe very strange things. So this stuff about playing the record back, I remember when Paul McCartney was supposed to have died, and somebody ran stories saying Paul McCartney's dead, and they found a doppelganger. They found a Paul McCartney lookalike. And how do you know that? Well, if you play an album backwards, it says Paul is dead, Paul is dead, Paul is dead. Now, I never played my record backwards, so I can't. If anybody in your audience has, let me know. And so you can come up with the most outlandish stories on the face of the earth, and there will be people who believe the most insane stuff. So that was part of the Beatles thing. And I want to tell you that I was talking to a member of the Manson family. I mean, she was very young when she was turned over by her parents to Charles Manson. She was 14. And she said to me, yes, we sat around. Charlie would give us LSD or mescaline or whatever, and we would play the music maybe 6 times a day or repeatedly. And he would tell us that this is what the music means. This is what the lyrics mean. And she said to me, you know what? We believed it. So there you go. We believed it.
Interesting. So did you get a chance to interview him at all?
I did not interview Charles Manson, but I'll tell you this. I sat for nearly a year, about 6 feet from him, watched him try and give the evil eye to people in the audience, and he loved it. Manson was a star of his own show. He wanted to be a rock and roll star. He never became a rock and roll star. He became a monster star, not only in the trial. I saw him, the way he behaved. I mean, he turned the court and the trial into a circus. And then many of you listening to this will know that for 5 to 10 years, Charles Manson became a television star because Diane Sawyer, Tom Snyder, Ron Reagan Jr., all trotted up to jail to interview Charlie. And if you look at those interviews, Charlie is performing. Charlie is doing what he loves to do, show off, play the monster. And people watch that show. I mean, they didn't want Charlie Manson to invade their living rooms, but Charlie Manson did invade the living rooms in the form of a television. And it was great fun. It was fun. You wanted to see the monster play. You wanted to see Charlie, and Charlie gave you what you wanted. Amazing.
Interesting. Now, obviously, like you said, you went out to Spawn Ranch and got lucky and got the interview. Did you do other research? Did you talk to other people?
Yes, I did. I mean, I spoke to Roman Polanski in France, and he was a bit hesitant to talk about it. He'd moved back to France. As some with long memories may recall, because he'd been arrested for having sexual relations with an underage girl. They were going to send him to prison, and he decided to do a bunk. So he jumped on the plane and ran off to France, who do not have an extradition order with America. So I finally, a few years later, went to see Polanski there, and he was quite, he said the judge lied to him. The judge told him that after he'd served 100 days in jail, that he would give him probation, and then he was going to send him back to prison. And Roman didn't want to go back to prison, so he just ran away. And he's still in his late 80s, living in Paris and still making films, believe it or not. So I went to see him, and he was very open about what I've just told you, his viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And then I went to see, before he died, a guy called Terry Melcher. Now, Terry Melcher was the son of Doris Day. Terry Melcher in the 60s was a very successful record producer. Terry Melcher caught the eye of Charles Manson. Charles Manson befriended Terry Melcher, thinking he would give him a recording contract. He never did. And the other odd coincidence was that Terry Melcher, at one time, with his girlfriend Candace Bergen, who was an actress, lived in the Roman Polanski murder house. Same house. What happened was Terry Melcher had moved out and rented the house to Roman Polanski. Now, there was a rumor that went around that said Charles Manson was so upset that Terry Melcher never made him a rock star that he wanted revenge. Well, I don't believe that's true. I think he wanted to send a message to Terry Melcher, because Terry Melcher, according to Manson, had let him down. And one other weird little factor, and I don't want to go on too long, is that Charles Manson almost became a rock star, because Charles Manson befriended the drummer of the Beach Boys, a guy called Dennis Wilson. Now, Dennis Wilson was a hot star, and the Beach Boys were huge. And somehow Charlie Manson was able to inveigle himself into the good graces of Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, so that Dennis, who lived in a rented mansion on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, invited Charlie and the girls to move in. And they did. And they moved in. They wrecked the house. They built up huge amounts of medical bills for penicillin, because many of the Manson girls were suffering from gonorrhea. And they sent the bill to Dennis Wilson. He paid for it. Finally, Dennis actually had to move out himself, go into a secret place, and evict the Manson family. And then after he evicted them from his mansion, they moved to the Spahn Movie Ranch. But I'll just tell you one other little facet. When Charles Manson moved into Dennis Wilson's house, it was nirvana for him, because Dennis Wilson thought Manson was brilliant, a genius, a new rock star. And so he invited all his rock star friends, the members of big bands, Mamas and the Papas used to show up at Dennis Wilson's house. And all the big stars of the 60s came along. And guess who was the evening's entertainment, playing on a guitar and singing? Mr. Manson. Wow. So Charlie had his shop window. Charlie actually gave Dennis Wilson a great song that he'd written. Dennis Wilson said, "Thank you very much, Charlie," changed the name of the song, recorded it, and didn't give Manson credit. So Manson was not very happy. It was, I think the song was called "Cease to Exist," and Manson actually wrote it, and Wilson kind of purloined it from him, and Charlie was very upset by that, not surprisingly.
Wow. I know, what was written in the papers, at the time about the case and whatnot. Was there stuff that you found out, sitting on, because I know from experience sitting on these trials, it can be an eye opener sometimes when the evidence is presented. Was there anything that didn't make it to the papers?
Well, a lot of the stuff that I told you about with Polanski, and I want to tell you that Terry Melcher, who was a key witness, did not testify in the main trial. Terry Melcher was very scared, was a scared man. And when Terry Melcher was finally called as a witness, it was nothing to do. It was just how you met Manson. It never went into any of this stuff I'm telling you. And I want to tell you that Terry Melcher, and I remember him, he appeared in court. He was terrified. Manson was sitting 10 feet away. And normally he would be cross-examined heavily. Terry Melcher came in, said, "I knew Manson. I'd gone to the ranch and auditioned him. End of my testimony." He left. I remember his testimony because Terry Melcher was nervous, and the judge kept saying, "Would you speak up, Mr. Melcher?" Melcher was on. I discovered, Terry mentioned that, and I went to see him when I went to see Doris Day years later. Terry was on tranquilizers, and that case destroyed Melcher's life because after that he did nothing else. He had a nervous breakdown. He had a bad accident on a motorcycle, and his career, which had once been huge, faded. And so everybody believes, and I think that's true, that the Manson connection infected and destroyed him.
Interesting. You said you went to Spawn Ranch. Did you get a chance to walk around and see what it was like there?
Oh, yes. I went to Spawn Ranch for 3 days because when I kept hearing these weird stories, and I called my London office, and they said, "Would you check that? This is too ridiculous. Are you sure you heard that?" Yeah. So I went back a few times. The place, it used to be a great movie ranch in the old days. A lot of the great westerns were shot there.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a place called Chatsworth, which is on the edge of the San Fernando Valley. And when I went there, it was decaying. There were beaten up old cars. There was a lot of horse manure all over the place. It had seen its finest hour. The ranch reeked of poverty, and it was just disheveled and beaten up. And it was only used, what was happening was people from Los Angeles went there only to rent horses. That's all they did. It was no longer being used as a movie set. And the saloon bar said saloon bar, but when you looked through there was nothing there. It was all front. It was all make-believe. And if anybody who's listening has seen the Quentin Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin, the director, captures the ranch beautifully. Because when I saw the movie, the movie is a fairy story. The ending of the movie, and I'm not giving anything away, it's been out a few years. The end of the movie is somewhat different to the true story.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see that film?
I have.
You have, so you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but when I saw that film, the hairs on my neck kind of stood up because Quentin Tarantino, the director, captured the atmosphere of that place, of that kind of rather decaying place, and the girls there in their sing-song voice. "Hello, Charlotte. Would you like a glass of water?" Not quite as bad as that, but it was kind of eerie, and in the movie, it was spooky.
When you first came in contact with the girls, was it any of the girls that ended up on trial?
No, don't forget the reason that that I didn't talk to the girls. I mean, I met Squeaky Frommy is the way she pronounced her name. Lynn Squeaky Frommy, and she was kind of still saying to me, "Well, Charlie is innocent," and all the rest of it. And I want to tell you what happened. I should go back a bit.
Okay.
After I went to the Spahn Movie Ranch, I wrote a very quick book about the reason for Manson murders and the reason for the Sharon Tate murders. The book came out before the trial. And I know I was in court one day when the lawyer for Charlie Manson came up to the judge and said, "Here is a book that's been written. It's biased against my client. It shows, it lays out the case. It's been publicized heavily. I want a change of venue from LA to San Francisco." And the judge looked at the book and said, looked at it for all of about 20 seconds. He says, "Motion denied. The trial is going to take place here." So on the first day of the trial, Lynn Squeaky Frommy, who was not involved in the murders, saw me, the book had come out, saw me coming into the trial, and she stood up and waved at me. And she said words that I will never forget to me. She said, "Hello, Ivor." She knew who I was. "Do you know what it feels like to have a sharp knife stuck down your throat?" Well,
Wow.
that was kind of, I tell you, it was scary. So I raced to the nearest payphone. I called my wife, and I had a 1-year-old daughter. And I said, "Can you leave the house? Because there's a lot of Manson family members out here who would seek revenge on me, on anyone." And my wife moved into some friends' houses. So that was the start of the trial. And that was a pretty scary thing. But to answer your question, when I went to the Spahn Movie Ranch, Lynn Squeaky Frommy and the other girls who were not arrested for the murder were there. They were telling me everything. "Oh, Charlie's going to be home soon." But the other guys, Paul Watkins, Brooks Poston, Danny DeSantos, Danny, I've forgotten his last name, sat down with me and told me the story I told you earlier about Beatles music. So the girls that were devoted to Charlie never opened up to me. And then I saw them at the trial, and they were sitting outside the trial. And I don't know if you know, but they shaved their heads and they carved swastikas in their forehead because Charlie had done the same. Charlie had carved a swastika in his forehead. And so did Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins, the 3 girls charged with Manson, carved crosses and then swastikas into their forehead, as Charlie did. So Charlie was in command throughout the whole trial.
Wow. So how accurate, they made that movie, about it. How accurate was, comparing the movie to the trial?
Well, to be honest with you, and you might correct me on this.
Helter Skelter, that was the movie.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the Quentin.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason that Helter Skelter was pretty accurate was that it was based on the book written by Vincent Bugliosi. And Vincent Bugliosi's book, Helter Skelter, was a pretty accurate depiction of what went down, of what happened. And it was a very successful crime book, one of the most successful crime books in American history. The only trouble with the book was, if you read it, and I read it, and many millions read it, you would think that the guy that solved the Manson case was Vincent Bugliosi, single-handed. That wasn't true, of course. He had the cops working with him, but he took a lot of credit for being. But I will say this about Vincent, who is no longer with us. He was a terrifically dedicated lawyer. He got a little bit carried away. He lived the case. He breathed the case. He slept in the courtroom or in a room next to the courtroom. And he worked dedicated. He gave his life almost to get these guys convicted. And he and Charlie hated each other. They would sort of spit at each other, almost not metaphorically, but not physically. And so Vincent Bugliosi's book was turned into a very good series. And of course, as you know, there's been a lot of other television and films. And I was in a documentary last year, a 6-hour documentary about the Manson case. And so there's fascination 50 odd years later with the case. I mean, here you and I are talking about it. Right. Most of your listeners, probably Charlotte, don't even, I mean, you say Charlie Manson, they say, oh, well, who was he now? Yeah, that name is familiar. But it was a case that rocked the world and devastated California. And people say it ended the 60s with a terrible brutality.
Well, the press kind of helped with the case too, because like in the Helter, I read the Helter Skelter book, I saw the movie, and there is one point in there where a regular citizen finds the gun, and the police kind of weren't interested in the gun, so they did call the press on it.
Well, what happened? You're talking about the murder gun now, aren't you?
Yes.
I mean, the amazing thing was the cops accidentally solved the case. Okay, what happened was they didn't have a clue. And then Susan Atkins, one of Charlie Manson's most devoted girls, was in jail for another murder. And she suddenly started boasting to her cellmates. And she said, you know who killed Sharon Tate? I did. And the cellmates thought, well, this is cell house bravado, rubbish. And then she described Sharon Tate's house, and one of the women had happily been to Sharon Tate's house, and thought, how would she know the details of Sharon Tate's house? And then she told them everything. And the cellmates tried to tell the cops, hey, this girl is the one that killed Sharon Tate. And it took about a week before anybody listened. But when they listened, they interviewed Susan Atkins, and Susan Atkins regurgitated every little detail. And the cops thought, wow. And that's how they solved the case, without Susan Atkins boasting.
Now, when you talk about Charlie brainwashing these kids, how did he do it?
Here's what he would do. First of all, he was a con man who'd survived prison intact without being physically kicked and beaten. I mean, he was savvy, and he had all these little girls. I kicked the little girls because one of them, who's written a great book called Diana Lake, wrote a book, and she was 15 when she was turned over to Manson by her parents. And all these girls found Charlie kind of romantic. And Charlie had this ability, like every good, brilliant, terrible, dastardly con man, to tell the girl what she wanted to hear. I mean, he was their father, he was their sexual partner. He knew how to handle them. He could swing them around his little finger. So they all showed up at this place. Oh, he's living on this ranch, and you know, the babies are, babies on the ranch that the girls gave birth to. Isn't this nirvana? Isn't this heaven? Whereas all our parents worry about insurance and there's a Vietnam War going on, and we want paradise. And when they joined Manson, he could cleverly twiddle them around each little finger and tell them what they wanted to hear. He could tell them why they had a rotten father, why their parents weren't as good as they, and they swallowed it. I mean, look at the guy, I can't remember his name, who made 900 people drink Kool-Aid. I can't remember the guy's name just at the moment.
Jim Jones.
I mean, do you remember what he was?
Yeah, Jim Jones.
Jim Jones, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, can you believe somebody being able to mesmerize them all? And this is what Manson did. And on top of it, on top of the mesmerization and the brainwashing, he gave them LSD, and he gave them mescaline, and he gave them other drugs. So you lose control of your mind. And he was able to manipulate them so well because he'd done it in prison, and now he had these little young people who didn't know the meaning of life, and they thought they found the Messiah, but really, they said he was Jesus Christ. So it was a massive con job done with panache, maybe that's the wrong word, done well.
Interesting. I had a question for you too. One last question before we get you off. It's been an hour already.
Oh my God.
Yeah, check it out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just blown by.
I don't believe it.
Is, as a crime reporter myself,
yes,
how did you deal with the police? Because it can be like pulling teeth to get anything out of the cops.
Yeah. Well, don't forget. You see, I'm sure you ran this. Look, in today's world, Charlotte, they would have solved the case, and they would have realized that the La Bianca case and the Sharon Tate case were the same finger that was responsible, same hand, because they would have fed it into the computer, and the computer would have said, yeah, blood on the, helter skelter. It happened at the La Bianca house. It happened at the Roman Polanski Sharon Tate house. Blood scrawled on the wall. There are similarities, but don't forget, before you were a police reporter, I want to tell you, LAPD, who handled one case, and the sheriffs, LA sheriffs, they didn't talk. They were in buildings like 200 yards apart, but they didn't drink together. It was a rivalry, and so then the cops never spoke to each other. This is our case, they would say. This is my case, they would say. And it took so long until, as I said, Susan Atkins spilled her guts, and they never put it together. They should have done. And maybe, as I say, in the computer age, things would have gone. The bells would have gone off, and everybody would have said, oh my God, they're similar. They didn't do it. And that's what happened. Now, there was a lot of heat on them to solve the case, but they still didn't. They didn't meet. They didn't talk. When somebody in the sheriff's office said to somebody in the LAPD, this case that you're handling and the case we're handling are similar. One of the guys said, come on. One was in Beverly Hills and one was in Los Feliz. You must be, get on with it. The cops have their own, credo. As a police reporter, things have opened up a little bit, maybe not. I haven't covered the police beat for a long time. But they're very defensive about themselves, and and they were ultra defensive back in the 60s and early 70s.
I understand. Because in my experience, it's hard. It's hard to try and get, because they don't want to give away the case details. No. Because it's still an active case, but they do get, they try to give you little tidbits to feed on for a while.
They do. I remember one of the cops told me the biggest mistake he ever made was when he spoke to a reporter. I forget who it was now. He spoke to a reporter, and the reporter said, aren't they, a little bit similar? And the cop said, I regret this to my dying day. I said, no, it's definitely not linked. It's a copycat murder. He's used that phrase. It's a copycat murder. Somebody saw it and repeated it. Of course, he was like off the planet with that remark.
I want to thank you for coming on. Oh my God, it's been wonderful.
Good. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you, Charlotte, and thank you very much for having me. And everybody get out my book, which is now on audio. Can I mention it again?
Absolutely. I was just going to ask you, how did they get your book?
Well, you can get it on the usual outlets like Amazon, or you can go to www.ivordavisbooks.com, where you can read about me more than you ever wanted to know about me. But you can buy my book, and now also if you go on the audio whatever, you can jog in the park or walk down the beach or stroll through the streets of Sacramento with the story in your ear. And any way is fine. And the same goes for my Beatles and Me on tour. Very different books, but strangely enough, as I've said, there is the Beatle link.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll
thank you very much,
somewhere
Charlotte.
down the line we'll get back together and have another chat, because that was fun.
Thank you. That was fun. And thanks for being such a good questioner.
And thank you for coming on. You have a good evening,
night.
okay?
Thank you, and you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, well, this is a great show. As you can see by the video here, I don't know what that red blotch is. I have no idea what that is. I'm having computer issues, and I've been having them for about a month. And I'm trying to put off because we're getting some really good guests here, and I don't want to have to do this thing on my cell phone. So hopefully everything works out. March 8th, we're going to have shows through March 8th, and what I'm planning to do is maybe take a week off, because the computer guy is going to come get this thing and completely do a hard drive rebuild on it, because I have been having these weird issues with it. So hopefully we make it to that point. Okay, so you guys see it clear like it's supposed to be. I see a red blotch. So I don't know what that's about. It could be something StreamYard's projecting back to me. But like I said, in March, at some point, I'm going to take a week off and get this computer completely rebuilt. That'll give the computer guy enough time to add some more, to put a new hard drive in and add some more RAM in here, so we can continue these shows. But it's been fun tonight. I had a blast with Ivor. It's fun talking to other journalists, but it's fun to hear journalists that do different things. I mean, probably the biggest personality I ever interviewed in my career was Steve Young of the 49ers. And Dusty Baker, people like that. And Hillary Clinton once, but that's about the extent of it. But anyway, I just want to thank everybody for coming. We do have a show on Wednesday, and be back. I'm going to go ahead and start teasing the show about 45 minutes after this show ends. And I want to thank everybody for coming, and hope to see you there. And if you like the show, share it. And we're trying to do a goal of everybody that watches the show to share it with at least 3 to 5 people, so we can get the word out about the show. And we do run this show out of pocket, so the internet and the fee for StreamYard to do this comes out of my pocket. So if you feel the need to donate, there's the PayPal down there. That would be great. I mean, I would really appreciate it. And if you don't like the show, share it anyway. Share it with people you don't like, right? Okay, anyway, I'm going to go. And, oh, yes, and that's right, the loyal listeners, people who do consistently come to the show and share it, I am putting out schedules once a month to show you guys who's coming on ahead of time, so you'll have a heads up. Facebook has me on a thing where I can only put the show on 7 days in advance, and when I'm running Mondays and Wednesdays, I have to hold up on the Wednesday show so we don't over-tease. So you will have that in hand as a loyal listener. Anyway, I will see you on Wednesday. You guys have a good night, and let me get this going here. Hang on, wrong button. Okay, lots of buttons to push in my life. And I will see you on Wednesday. See ya.